My name is Eric. I'm one of the associate pastors here at Valley, and I have the great privilege of introducing to you somebody who's making an immense impact on the world for Christ, and Greg Kokel is his name, and he is with us, and he is the founder of Stand to Reason Ministries, and this is just incredible. He has been an on the radio interactive talk host for Point Counterpoints on Christianity for 33 years. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who's probably heard it all. And he has spoken at over 90 secular college campuses defending the truth claims of Christianity. It's amazing. And so thank God. Thank God we've got people, and Greg is just one of the best. And he's an author of 7 books, and arguably his most famous is the one that he's going to be doing this conference on tonight. It's called Tactics. And even with the subject tactics, sometimes people, they hear apologetics and defense of the faith tactics. Somebody said to me this week, does this mean you're going to get together and everyone's going to yell at each other? And no. In fact, the book and the subject is very much geared for filtering people away from the kind of trigger-happy culture that we have, so we can speak truth in love and we can season our words with grace. It's real common, though, and I know for many people still here at Valley and probably Kern County, people are still a little new to apologetics. And, why would we even do a defense of the faith, and who has it really impacted? You think of some of the major players of the most recent Christian history, and so many of them have been impacted and came to Christ or were grounded in Christ through apologetics. One's a guy named C.S. Lewis. There's a guy named Josh McDowell. We had his son here, Sean McDowell, who was impacted at an important time in his life. We've had Lee Strobel here, who also has been impacted by that. And, of course, J. Warner Wallace is someone. And not only that, but I was actually reading just this week about a story of a lady professor named Molly Worthen at the University of North Carolina. She's a religious studies history professor, and secular campuses, this is often the case, where she ended up, of course, just landing hard on skepticism. She's an agnostic and a skeptic. And she went to a local church in North Carolina just to do some interviews about Christian history, and the church started engaging with her. As a matter of fact, the senior pastor started asking her some questions, and they're kinds of questions that I would call Kokelisms. And they're these Greg Kokel type questions like, have you ever considered? And she ended up having to admit that she had never considered the historicity of the Gospels or the historic evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And about a year and a half ago, she did a deep dive into those subjects, and she is now a follower of Jesus Christ. And that church, she got baptized at that church. That's one of our denomination's flagship churches. It's the Summit Church with Pastor J.D. Greer, who is an author that we read here at staff at Valley Baptist Church. So it's amazing how God has and does use this to reach people and break down barriers. A little closer to home, we have at least 2 pastors here at Valley who've been impacted by apologetics. One is our very own Patrick Gomez, who is our middle school pastor. Almost every Sunday morning, Patrick's up here, sometimes every single service, baptizing middle schoolers. And Patrick Gomez came to our church. He came as somewhere between a deist and an agnostic, went to a life group and was engaged with apologetic study at the life group on and off that broke down barriers, and now he's a staff pastor at our church. And then last of all is just my own testimony. I got to the point in my life, even though I was raised in a Christian family, my dad being a pastor, when I was about 19, it reminds me of an old Christian song where the chorus keeps repeating this: I almost threw it all away. And that's the story of my life. And if it wasn't for apologetic truths and thinking ideas to ground me, I can honestly say I would probably be gone from the Christian faith and Christian circles. So I challenge you with that. I encourage you to really listen to what Greg has to say. There's arguably nobody better who can give you practical ways of engaging with the lost culture and helping people get grounded in their Christian faith. So everybody, please welcome Greg Kokel.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Yeah, I can use that. Wow, that was sweet. 2 days ago, I was in northern Wisconsin on a boat catching big smallmouth bass. One of my favorite things. And I got on a plane yesterday, flew all the way here from northern Wisconsin, got to my house at 2 o'clock in the morning this morning, got up, packed my wife into the truck, my F-150, drove out here to Bakersfield. Tomorrow morning we're getting up. She's going to take me to LAX, and I'm going back to Wisconsin, going fishing. But I'm here tonight with you. And I am thrilled to be here. You know, when I teach public speaking, I tell the students, don't ever start out by saying, I'm really glad to be here. Because that's the way everybody starts out. Nobody's going to believe you. But I'm really glad to be here. So glad I left my fishing poles and my smallmouth bass and my younger brother in Wisconsin to be with you tonight. And I want to make a kind of prediction about what's going to take place tonight. The prediction is that if you pay attention to what I have to say in the next couple of hours, if you take notes especially, that's going to be helpful. I see some of you with notebooks and pens, and that warms the cockles of my teacher heart, as it were. And then you begin to put these things that I offer you into play. You are going to see a radical change in your ability to make a difference in the lives of others, skeptics, challengers, friends who don't know Christ, to begin thinking more productively and carefully about the claims that Jesus has on their life. Now, I know that's a bold thing to say, but I say it with understanding of what people have told me about the material we're talking about, the material that's covered in detail in this book, Tactics, a game plan for defending, a game plan for discussing. This is not a good sign. A game plan for discussing your Christian convictions, because when I do events like this and people come up to me and say they've read the book and they've put this book, the principles, into play, I get a consistent response from them. I hear them say, this book changed my life. Now, that's very humbling, and it's, I mean, wow, cool. But I'm not surprised, because the principles that are in that book that I've practiced and developed over a long period of time, engaging people in lots of circumstances, they changed my life too. They changed my life in the terms of my ability to engage productively, especially in a way that made my engagement look more like diplomacy than D-Day, all right? To get people thinking about the critical issues without getting in fights with them, okay? So that's my prediction here, and I just want to add this little thought, and if you're a parent, you might want to write this down, because it's good to tell your kids. If you don't do it, it don't work, all right? Same with this, like a lot of things in life. Now, I get a chance to speak at a lot of conferences, Apologetics conference. I rub shoulders with a lot of really smart people, and I got to tell you, if you're a Christian facing challenges, even from yourself or from other people, we have a very deep bench. And some of those wonderful people have been on the stage before in the last few years, and Pastor Eric just mentioned some of their names. But there is not an issue that any of you have encountered, a challenge that you haven't had to face as a follower of Jesus, that somebody on our team, and I don't mean Sandoriz's team, I mean our team, the Body of Christ team, has not done a deep dive on and come up with a really solid answer. And so I get a chance to traffic with these folks, and it's great for me because I learn a lot from them. But I realize that in conferences like this, there's always a liability, because you get a lot of information. So you have a Friday night and an all-day Saturday event or something like that, and wow, there's so much information, and your brain gets full, right? How do you get that information into play in a conversation? That's the problem. That's the missing piece. And that's what I want to provide for you this evening. I want to provide this bridge from the content to the conversation, or a bridge from the scholarship to the relationship. But for this bridge to work best, it's going to require a little bit of an adjustment in the way you probably understand evangelism. And that's what I had to adjust to, because I became a Christian during the Jesus movement. I don't know if you saw that movie, Jesus Revolution. I went for a long time. I didn't see it until about 2 weeks ago. My wife and I watched it. And people said, "Did you see the movie?" I said, "No, I didn't see the movie. I was there. I lived that." But I became a Christian during that time, and man, things were really easy to do evangelism back then. The Holy Spirit was working in a powerful fashion. And you give people the simple gospel, and people respond to it. And that was part of the reason that they responded to it, is they understood it. But I'll tell you, that was 50 years ago. Nowadays, I have a different approach entirely. In fact, I'm going to say a couple of things about my approach that's going to probably shock you a little bit. That's okay. Stay with me. And if this appeals to you, if you find there's some truth in it, begin to apply it to your life, I think you're going to see some differences. Here's the first thing that might surprise you. When I get in a conversation with somebody that I hope will have a spiritual impact in their life, I never have it as a goal to lead that person to Christ. In fact, I don't even have it as a goal necessarily to get to the gospel. I'm not going to try to close the deal. I'm not going to try to get them to sign on the dotted line, okay? Now, I know that sounds a little bizarre, depending on the background you have for evangelism, okay? This is a Baptist church, right? Baptists are really into evangelism. That's fabulous, okay? The problem with most Christians, though, is their way of approaching evangelism has not changed since the Jesus movement, okay? Back then it was easy. People understood the gospel. People don't understand the gospel anymore. The gospel's not simple anymore. Now, it is simple in its basic content, but it's not simple to the ears of the people in our culture. I told a guy once that Jesus died for his sins. He said, "I'm sorry to hear that." Did he get better? You know, that kind of thing. It's like, and so we have this incredible message that we understand about the love and the grace of God that nowadays is often interpreted as hate speech in our culture. 50 years ago, people understood the words and the concepts. So when you were speaking those concepts to them, at least they understood what you were talking about. Now things have changed radically. Another problem with kind of the simple gospel approach is there are lots of challenges that we're facing now that we never faced before. We still have atheists. We still have the problem of evil. We still have evolution in there. We have challenges on the Bible, all kinds of that stuff. It's still in play. But there's all kinds of new things now that we have to deal with that we never had to deal with before. All the sexual, what might be called pelvic issues that, as one apologist put it, all the things that we're faced with, the gender stuff and the transsexual and same-sex marriage and all of that, and it's coming on with a force like a tidal wave over us. And these are the kinds of things that keep people from even taking Christianity seriously at all. And so that's another problem, all these difficulties that are in the way that we're not always sure how to deal with. Here's a third problem with the simple gospel approach, and that is if I told you I was going to give you a game plan that would allow you to get kind of to the close and get people to sign on the dotted line, whatever. Oh, you take notes and say, praise the Lord, whatever, and then you would do it. And the reason you would do it is because you're frightened. And I'm completely sympathetic to that. I'll talk about that more in my second hour. Because it's scary out there. When people think that the message of God's love to you is really hate speech, boy, that's tough to speak up, isn't it, in that kind of environment, okay? So because of this development over the years and things getting harder and harder and whatever, I've completely revamped the way I do evangelism. And it turns out that the way that I've revamped it is much closer to New Testament style than it was before. The culture has moved on, but our techniques have not moved on. Now, just to be clear, our message does not change. The gospel is the gospel. All of it. I mean, the good news is not the good news without the bad news, right? So that's all part of the package. But the way people hear it is different. I want you to think about something that Jesus said in Matthew 13. This is the parable of the sower. Now, you probably have the same experience that I have frequently. You read through passages and you've read them a bunch of times, but sometimes you go through something like a parable like that, and all of a sudden something jumps out that you hadn't noticed before but was always there. And that happened to me a few years ago as I'm reading the parable of the sower. And you know the 4 different types of soil, the word is scattered there like seed, and there are different responses. And Jesus is talking about that. And of course, after he gives the parable, when he's alone with his disciples, he explains the meaning of it. And the first seed goes on the road. It's hard ground. The birds come and carry it away, and you figure, well, that's not too hard to understand. That's the seed of the gospel hitting the hard heads of the screwballs who don't want to hear anything. The knuckleheads, it bounces off and it doesn't go anywhere. That makes a lot of sense. But it's interesting when Jesus explained that ground to his disciples what he said. Matthew 13, verse 19. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom, this is the first ground, right? He's explaining it. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, and does not understand it. You know, that never stood out for me before. All of a sudden it jumped out. If they hear the word and they don't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. So apparently something's getting in. It just has no place of understanding to stick. And I've been thinking then, maybe the way we're communicating in our evangelism is we're communicating in a way that people just don't understand. And so then the devil comes and takes it away. It's interesting when he talks about the 4th ground, this is the productive ground, he says this, and the one on whom seed was sown on the good soil, this is the man who hears and understands and bears fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. So as I'm engaging in all these different crazy circumstances over the years, I'm thinking about how can I communicate and engage in a way that people will understand. So if they're going to reject the truth, at least they know what they're rejecting. Remember I said a little bit ago, maybe something surprising, that when I get in a conversation with somebody that I hope will lead to spiritual things, I don't have it as a goal to lead that person to Christ. By the way, I do want them to come to Christ. Just for the record. I also said I don't have as a goal necessarily in any conversation to get to the gospel. But is the gospel necessary for them? Yes, absolutely. It's the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. Okay? Now I'm going to say something. Fasten your seatbelts here. I actually haven't prayed with someone to receive Christ in over 30 years. I know what you're thinking. What a loser! But you know what? There's a lot of you in the audience who haven't prayed with someone to receive Christ in a long time and maybe ever in your life, and you feel like a spiritual loser because you don't have someone that you have actively led to Christ in that way. So let me say this. I have never been more effective for the gospel than I have in the last 30 years. And the reason is because a thought began to occur to me over time that really began to take root and influence the way that I engage people as an ambassador for Christ. I don't even think of myself in terms of evangelism. That sounds like conflict, right? Nowadays. I think of myself as an ambassador, which is a biblical concept. We are ambassadors for Christ, Paul told the Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And here's the concept that you can write this down. It's an aphorism. An aphorism is a kind of a catchy phrase that's sticky, you know, but has some insight to it. Jesus didn't teach in 3-point sermons that all started with the same letter. He taught in aphorisms. He who is first shall be last, and he who is last shall be first. See, that's easy to remember. Of course, I helped you out a little bit on that one. That's an aphorism. Render unto Caesar, etc., etc. So those are aphorisms. So here's one for you. Before there can be any harvest, write this down. Before there can be any harvest, There always has to be a season, let's just call it gardening, okay? Before there can be a harvest, there's got to be a season of gardening. No duh. That's not even profound. It's so obvious. And here you are, it's Joaquin Valley, right? Is that what they call this? San Joaquin. Well, you're in this place that's really big, that has a lot of vegetables and stuff. So you understand the concept agriculturally. It also applies to spiritual harvesting. Before there can be a harvest, there's always got to be a season of gardening. I want you to think of Jesus in John chapter 4. Now, that's a famous passage because of the woman at the well encounter. A lot of sermons are about that. I want you to think about what happens afterwards. Jesus tells her that he's the Messiah. I who speak to you am he. She goes off to tell everybody else in Sychar about this man. The disciples aren't part of the conversation. They come in, and Jesus says to them, you say there are 4 months and then comes the harvest. I say to you, look on the fields, and they are white with harvest. Now, I don't think Jesus was saying every field is already for harvest, but Sychar was. And then he says to them, essentially, you are about to reap where you did not sow. You are about to harvest where you did not garden. You're gonna have the easy pickings, right? Somebody else did the heavy lifting. Now, when Jesus says this, I want you to notice a couple of things that are involved there. First of all, he's identifying one field, in that case, Sychar. But there's 2 different seasons. There's a sowing season and a reaping season. There's a gardening season and there's a harvesting season, okay? And there are 2 different kind of workers, even though there's one team. The one team of the disciples, but there are 2 workers. There are gardeners and there are harvesters, sowers and reapers, right? And like I said, the disciples are going to get to do the easy work because the hard work is in the gardening. Now, I want you to think about this. This is especially, should be obvious because you're part of a larger agricultural community. When the harvest is ripe, the harvesting is easy. When the fruit is ripe, it just drops into the basket. I became a Christian in September 28, 1973, a little more than 50 years ago. My younger brother Mark was the one who did most of the gardening in my life, but there were some others. And when he came to my apartment on that Friday night, he began to talk to me more about Jesus. And I told him, Mark, you don't need to tell me any more about Jesus. I've already decided I want to become a Christian. Now, to hear him tell the story, he said, what you said was, I already am a Christian. The point is, Mark did not harvest me. I harvested myself. Or more specifically, the Holy Spirit harvested me, but it wasn't somebody who led me to Christ. Why? Because the fruit was ripe. And when the fruit is ripe, you just bump into it and it falls into the basket. That's the way it works. And a lot of times, if we are focusing on trying to get people to pray to receive Christ, and that's our goal in those conversations, we're pulling on fruit that's not ripe and we bruise it. Instead of falling back into gardening mode and gardening, and I'll give detail of what that looks like. Let me take a poll here, and I've been doing this a lot in churches because I want to drive home this point that Christians become Christians not because they get challenged to receive Christ or not because they've come forward on an altar call, and I'm not against any of that. I've done both of them. I do them on different occasions. But I want to take a poll here of this audience, and I want you to raise your hand if, 1, you're a Christian, and 2, you did not become a Christian by coming forward at an altar call or praying with someone to receive Christ as Lord and Savior. You got the question now? Okay, how many people are Christian who did not become Christian that way? Really high. Stick them up. Look around you. That is 70% of the audience harvested themselves. Right? Maybe they were raised in a Christian home and they never remember when they became a Christian. This is the way it works. This is the way God works. This is the way it is in the New Testament. Gardening, and when the fruit is ripe, it just comes in. Think of Acts chapter 2, Pentecost Sunday. The message is preached there, and bang, all these people come in. They don't have to be invited because of the gardening that was done, not just that in that sermon by Peter, but also in their lives through Jesus, who Peter makes reference to as if everybody knows what's been going on for the last few years there in the Jerusalem area. Remember, I told you just a little while ago that I haven't prayed with anyone to receive Christ in over 30 years. Let me ask you a question. How many people here have heard of this guy named J. Warner Wallace? Yeah, he was here a couple years ago, right? A guy who was a Torrance PD cold case detective, LA County. Really good. He would solve these crimes, these murder crimes that were cold for 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 years. Had 4 of his cases featured on TV on, what is that, Nightline? How many people watch that gory stuff, you know? This guy was, they called him on that show the evidence whisperer because he was really good. But J. Warner Wallace was an atheist until he got challenged by someone that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And he said, well, I'll see about that. And he bought a New Testament at a thrift store somewhere and started reading the accounts. And he said, hey, this looks like eyewitness testimony. And he took his detective skills and his capability, applied it to that, and then he became a Christian because he realized this is good testimony. Jesus rose from the dead. I'm in. And then he became a Christian case maker and then a Christian author and wrote Cold Case Christianity, a best-selling book, and 4 others since then. And you know, if you saw Jim is he's the best that I have ever seen. Now, here's something that you don't know about J. Warner Wallace. Jim was in my garden when he was an atheist. He was listening to my radio show, going to our website, being challenged by our material. Now, I didn't pray with him to receive Christ. I don't know who did. I don't even know if anybody did, to be honest with you. Some of you might know Abdu Murray, Muslim, who became a Christian, and now he's got a Christian organization. He's written a number of books. Abdu Murray was in my garden when he was still a Muslim. One of the guys on my team, John Noyes, he was an atheist in my garden. He told me, he was screaming at me on the radio as he's driving down the 405. Couldn't stand me. Now he's on my team. He's one of our speakers. He didn't know when he became a Christian. He has no spiritual birthday that he knows about. God knows. All he knows is he was an atheist. Now he's a Christian. Gardening. You know what happened? Somebody went into my garden and harvested my crop. Get out of my garden. Think that's my attitude? No. Because Jesus said in John 4, the one who sows and the one who reaps can rejoice together. We're all on the same team. And as I look back over my life, all the things I was doing, the writing and the public speaking and all the interactions that I was having with people on radio, I realized I'm not a harvester. I'm a gardener. That's what I do. I garden. And guess what? That's fine with me. Doesn't matter if somebody else harvests my crop. We're all on the same team. And in fact, since the harvest is easy when the gardening has been done properly, I think most Christians are gardeners. But they have never been given gardening tools, just harvesting tools. And that's hard to use if you're not really a harvester. Now, you might be asking, how do you know whether you're a harvester or a gardener? This is very easy. If you've listened to what I've said so far and you're bugged at me, and you're thinking, come on, Coco, you're letting all these folks off real easy. Get in there, get to the gospel, challenge people to receive Christ. And there are some people like that. If that's you, God bless you, we need you. Okay? You're a harvester. But if what you're thinking right now, and I'm looking at your faces, you're thinking, oh man, I've never heard this before. Oh, that makes a lot of sense with what Jesus said in New Testament, and oh, maybe there's a place for me. If that's what you're thinking, you're a gardener like me. And we need the harvesters, but we need the gardeners, or there would be no harvesting. Now, because now I'm operating more as a gardener, not a harvester, I have a different goal in mind for any interaction that I have with people. And whenever I'm speaking to an audience that's a non-Christian audience, I always start the same way, and I tell them what my goal is for that talk with them. I start out by telling them that 50 years ago, when I was a student at UCLA, I began thinking about what Jesus claimed for himself and the claim he made about the world and the claim he made on my own life. I got a lot of discussions, I pushed back, got in arguments, came back to the table, and I finally decided Jesus got it right, that he saw the world the way it really was, and that the smart money was on him. And so I've been following him ever since. It hasn't been easy. I let them know that. But then I tell them, I said, I'm not here to convert you tonight. Collective sigh of relief. I said, I have a more modest goal, so here's my goal. I'm telling my audience this, but here is my goal in any conversation. I tell them, all I want to do is put a stone in your shoe. Right? Do you ever have a stone in your shoe? It's not the end of the world, but it's kind of annoying, right? You got to deal with it. So I tell them, okay, so I'm here to annoy you. In a good way. They all chuckle like that because they expect the Christian to annoy them. I say, okay, I'm your guy. But what I hope is going to happen is that you're hobbling out of here after what I've had to say, that something is stuck with you and is getting at you. And if I can do that, I'm a happy camper. Fine. I've done my gardening. And then I go on with my talk, whatever it happens to be. But this is my goal. Now, do I ever get to the gospel? Some of you might be thinking, when do you get to the gospel? I say, I get to the gospel whenever I want. In other words, I don't feel obliged to stick it in anywhere in a conversation where it doesn't necessarily apply just because somebody told me you always got to get to the gospel in a conversation. Jesus didn't get to the gospel in every conversation. Matter of fact, gospel is good news. A lot of times Jesus just got to the bad news. You ever read the Sermon on the Mount, people say, oh, that's great moral teaching of Jesus. Yeah, it is, but did you ever pay attention to what he said? Your righteousness must exceed the most holy people you know, or you're not in the kingdom. Huh? Right, don't commit murder. Well, I didn't do that. Did you ever call your brother a fool? Yeah, you're going to hell. That's Jesus. Don't commit adultery. Didn't do that. You ever think about it? You're going to hell. This is not good news. It's bad news. And I think that's a part of what Jesus was showing, was this is the demand that is on every one of us. He ends that section by saying, you are to be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect. Wow, bad news, bad news, bad news. No good news in there. He's letting the bad news sink in, okay? So I get to the gospel when I think it's appropriate in the conversation. Maybe I just give the bad news. Just depends. Maybe I give them something to think about. Maybe there's a challenge and I'm trying to parry a challenge in a certain way. Maybe they have an opposite point of view and I'm trying to give them something to think about their view that's a problem. Cause them to doubt their own view a little bit. I'm just looking to put a stone in their shoe. That's my gardening goal. But how do we do that? How do we initiate conversations in which we don't sound weird? How do we approach conversations so they look more like diplomacy than D-Day? Well, that's where the game plan comes in. And here I'm going to make a promise about the remainder of the time we have, which is another 20 minutes or so in this first session, okay? In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you a brief sketch of a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know, or how knowledgeable, or aggressive, or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. Now, it trades a little bit on a notion that Paul mentions in Colossians chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. Make a note of that verse, but I'll tell you what it says. You can look it up later. Colossians 4, verse 5 and 6. And here's what Paul says. He says, first, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Okay? So he says, be smart. Then he says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned as it were with salt. So he says, be smart. Then he says, be nice. What a concept, huh? And then he says, so that you know how to respond to each person. So that you know how to respond to each person. Be smart, be nice, but be tactical. Treat people as individuals. Why? Because they are. Everybody's got a different story. Everybody's got different challenges when it comes to spiritual things. And you want to take that into consideration. And this is where the game plan comes into play. So let me give you an example of how this played out for me. In northern Wisconsin, when I was up fishing for smallmouth bass, it was about 20 years ago now, in this particular instance, all right? So I was out with a local pastor, and I caught, at that time, the largest smallmouth bass of my life, which was 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Now, that's a pretty big smallie for that neck of the woods. I was really proud of that fish, had a picture taken of it, and I was going to get that picture digitized so I could put up on the screen at his church where I'll be teaching that following weekend. You know, I was going to flex my fishing muscles there, and all those folks in northern Wisconsin, they understand that kind of stuff, right? So we took the film, F-I-L-M, to get it developed. And there was a young lady that was at the kiosk there processing our order, and she had a large pentagram hanging from her neck. Pentagram is a 5-pointed star, and it's often an occultic symbol. And this looked like a statement. So I said, does that jewelry have religious significance to you? She said, yes, it does. The 5 points stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit. Okay, now the bells are going off in my head a little bit. It's familiar to me. But I wanted to make sure that this had religious significance to her personally. Some people wear a cross, and it really doesn't mean anything, right? And so I asked her, and she said, yes, it does. I'm a pagan. Now, I'm a trained professional, right? So I'm just taking this all in. But my dear, wonderful wife, who I love so much, was standing next to me. And when she hears this young lady identify herself as a pagan, it caught her by surprise, and she starts laughing. Then she catches herself and says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude, but I never heard anybody admit it before. She'd only heard the word pagan when her girlfriends would call her kids in, get in here, you bunch of pagans, you know, that kind of thing. Now, the young lady wasn't offended, and she went on to explain her point of view, and I realized after a few sentences that I was talking to a witch. So I just asked her, are you Wiccan? She said, yes, I am. And then she said, we respect all life. I said, well, that's good. That would probably mean you're pro-life then with regard to the abortion issue, right? She said, no, I'm not pro-life, I'm pro-choice. Oh. I said, isn't it unusual for a witch to be pro-choice? And she said, it is a little bit. And then she qualified it. She said, here's what she said. She said, I know I could never do that, referring to abortion. I could never kill a baby. Those are her words. Now, it stands to reason we do training on the abortion issue to demonstrate and show that abortion takes the life of an innocent human being without proper justification. Baby killing, if you will, but we don't use that language. The reason we don't use that language is because we have an argument. We don't want other people to think we're using loaded rhetoric to make our point. You get a lot of demagoguery, loaded rhetoric pounding the podium. They don't have an argument. They just got noise, all right? We've got an argument, so we don't use that language. But I'm not the one who is calling abortion baby killing in this conversation. It is the person who is pro-abortion who's identifying abortion as baby killing. And guess what? I'm paying attention, all right? So you know how to respond to each person, right? I'm paying attention. And so now in this conversation, am I going to talk about abortion anymore? No, I'm going to talk about what? Baby killing. That's the language I'm going to use because she's justified it, verified it, whatever. But she tells the reason why she wouldn't kill a baby. She says, well, I wouldn't want any, pardon me for chuckling, but it's kind of crazy. I'm not going to kill any babies because I wouldn't want anything bad to come back on me. It's like a karma thing. What goes around comes around. Like, I'm not going to kill any baby. God, you never know what's going to happen to you if you start killing. Really? That's your reason? Okay, well, I didn't pursue that. But I said, okay, you wouldn't kill babies. That's good. But maybe we should stop other people from killing babies. And she said, well, I think people should have a choice. I said, by the way, what's the choice we're talking about right now? The choice to kill babies. And so I asked her, you mean they should have a choice to kill babies? And she said, well, I think all things should be taken into consideration. And I said, okay, what would be a legitimate consideration to make it okay to kill a baby? And she immediately said incest. Okay, let me pause for a moment, though. Because what she's doing is trotting out all the pro-choice slogans, right? But now we're not talking about pro-choice or even pro-abortion. We are talking about pro-baby killing. Explicitly. That's her language. And now the slogans are starting to sound a little bit weird, but she's not hearing it. I'll tell you why she's not hearing it. Because she's just using slogans. And this happens all the time. You talk with other people, and they are socialized to say certain things regarding spiritual or ethical issues. They're just socialized to say that. And they never thought about it. Now, this happens on both sides of the aisle. Christians do the same thing, and they get themselves in trouble when they receive Jesus as Lord and Savior. This doesn't mean anything to others, and the Christians aren't able to explain it very clearly themselves without using a bunch of religious lingo that means nothing to the other person. So this is true on both sides, okay? So I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, if I had a 2-year-old that was standing next to me who had been conceived by incest, on your view, I should be allowed to kill this 2-year-old. Is that right? Okay, now let me ask you a question. Is that a fair application of her view, so far as you know it? Yeah, I think it is. And if it wasn't, by the way, she has an opportunity to correct me because I don't want to misunderstand her view. But it was a fair application. I wasn't misunderstanding, and it stopped her in her tracks. And she's thinking about it. And I don't know if this is when the stone went in her shoe or not. We don't always know that. God knows. We don't know that. We do what we can. Trust God for the results. But finally, as she paused, she says, I'd have mixed feelings about that. Mixed feelings about killing the 2-year-old? Well, at least they're mixed. That's progress, right? Now the light is growing behind me. And I realize that my opportunity as an ambassador has come to an end because I'm interfering with her work product now. Now, had I been of a different frame of mind about these kinds of conversations, I might have thought, wait a minute, I haven't got to the gospel. I haven't got to the gospel yet. But I didn't feel obliged to force fit the gospel in a conversation where it just didn't fit. I took the opportunity God gave me. I did what I could in that opportunity, and then I was done. I was out of there. We went out in the parking lot. My wife and I prayed for the gal. I took a lot of notes so I get the story right when I retold it. Now, all that, the whole account is in the tactics book, The Witch of Wisconsin. Now, I've never seen that woman again. I don't know what happened to her, but God does. In that circumstance, she was my task, but she was God's problem. She was my task, but she's God's problem. He cares more about her than I do, okay? I took what I could in that moment, did the gardening that I could do, and then trusted that woman to the Lord and moved on. I didn't worry about it. It wasn't an issue to me. Now, I want you to think about that conversation. In that conversation, I asked about 7 different questions. I used questions to initiate the conversation. I used questions to gather more information from her. I even used questions to expose what I thought was a weakness or a flaw in her view. Now, in my notes earlier, I used to say, oh, well, she was doing all the work. I had that in my notes. I said, wait a minute, if she's doing all the work, I was doing some of the work, but I wasn't doing some of the work. I was doing none of the work. So I changed my notes. I said, she's doing all of the work. And then I thought, well, she wasn't working either. We were just having a casual conversation. There was no lines drawn in the sand. There were no dukes up. We weren't defending turf. We weren't arguing. And that's the way I want it. And here's a simple principle. You can write this one down too. If anybody gets mad, I'm going to lose. If I get mad, I lose. If they get mad, I lose. So if we can avoid people getting mad, that's great. Okay? I want you to notice, though, in that conversation, the series of questions that I asked, okay? This is the power of the tactical approach. And in the book, I have lots of different maneuvers with different names, like Taking the Roof Off and Just the Facts, Ma'am, and Rhodes Scholar and Inside Out and What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And these are all different maneuvers you can use in a conversation to make things easier and help the other person maybe to see the mistake in their thinking, okay? But there is a tactic that's the center of the game plan. That's the essential part of the entire game plan. That's the simplest tactic imaginable to stop a challenger in their tracks, to turn the tables, and to get them thinking. And also to put you in the driver's seat of the conversation, because that's where you want to be. You don't want them running you around. We've had plenty of that. Okay? You want to be in the driver's seat. Now, it doesn't mean you're doing most of the talking. Lots of times you're doing very little talking, given the nature of the game plan. But nevertheless, this is the core tactic that all the other tactics serve, okay? And this tactic has a name, and the name of this core tactic, the core of the game plan, is Columbo, as in the infamous Lieutenant Columbo of TV fame. And who has no idea of who I'm talking about? Just go ahead and raise your hand. Don't be shy. Well, you are completely culturally deprived. So, I will give you an education. Lieutenant Columbo of TV fame was a detective, murder detective. He showed up at the crime scene with this trench coat, looked like he slept in it. I got mine at Salvation Army. My wife said she's a thrift store queen. She said, whenever you buy something at a thrift store, you always check the pockets because you never know what you're going to find when you... Oh, what's this? Oh my gosh, look at that. Columbo has a cigar, right? Now this is just plastic, Pastor. Where are you? Okay, it's just, no worries. For all you Baptists out there, I'm just saying. I actually hate real cigars. Whenever I get a real cigar, I always destroy it by fire. All the way down, I don't want anybody to stumble, right? He's also got a pad of paper. Can't write on a pad of paper. Why can't he? He doesn't have a pen or pencil. You know, he's not prepared. He's got to bum a pencil off. And he's walking around the crime scene, scratching his head, muttering to himself. This guy doesn't look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag, right? He's stupid. But he's stupid like a fox because he's got a plan, right? And at some point, he'll pause with his fingers to furrow brow like his deep and painful thought. And then he'll say something like this. I don't know. There's something about this thing that bothers me. Do you mind if I ask you a question? He asks the question, right? Gets an answer back. Oh, you're very intelligent, yeah. One more thing. And then he one more things them to death, right? Question after question. Sometimes they get upset. He says, I'm sorry, it's because I'm asking all these questions, but I can't help it. It's a habit. And this is a habit you need to get into. The key to the Columbo tactic is that the Christian goes on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions to advance the conversation. Let me say that again. The key to the tactic is that you go on the offensive, you take the initiative, but in an inoffensive way. You come in, so to speak, under the radar with carefully selected questions to advance the conversation. And so we're going to use questions to maneuver in conversations, to be effective and to be gracious and to make a difference in someone's life. Okay, this is a game plan. What questions, by the way, are great. I have another book that I'll mention in a few moments with a chapter that says, questions keep you safe. I mentioned that it's frightening out there, right? You ask questions, you have a tremendous margin of safety because you are not making statements. When you make statements, your statements can be attacked. People could say, hey, okay, show me, prove to me, demonstrate to me, justify your statements. Why do you believe that? But if you're not making statements, at least initially, certainly not directly, then you don't have anything to defend. If you're asking questions, drawing other people out, you're showing an interest in them. You are learning about them so you know how to respond to each person. So our game plan is going to consist of using questions in very particular ways to keep you safe and to make you effective. Now, Jesus did this all the time, and he was very effective. He asked something like 250 some questions in the Gospels, okay? And this is going to allow you to maneuver with, I mentioned, tremendous amount of safety, but also to gather the kind of information that's going to be necessary for you to move forward. You need to have intel in any conversation before you move forward, all right? Now, We're going to take a break in just a few minutes, and it's just going to be a modest break. Maybe stand up and shake it out, and Eric's going to guide you in that. He'll have a couple of comments to make. And when we return, I'm going to go into the game plan proper. Now, there are actually 3 steps to the game plan, and they're very simple. And in the first 2 steps, I'm actually going to give you the model question that you use. And only just with those first 2 steps, that is going to fulfill the promise that I made to you to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know, or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. But I have time tonight, because we have 2 sessions, to go into the 3rd step, which is a little more advanced, but it will give you an understanding about how you can make a powerful impact using questions to get people thinking and accomplish the important gardening that is essential before a harvest can happen. What we're talking about today is a way of approaching the task of engaging other people about the claims of Christ. And I'm offering and suggesting maybe a little different way than you've been exposed to, because I think the approach that I'm suggesting is much more appropriate for the culture that we find ourselves in. And I think lots of times that Christians are not effective in that process for basically 3 reasons. One of them is I think they have a misunderstanding of the New Testament way that evangelism is done. And that's the whole gardening approach that I've been talking about for the most part up to now. We spent a lot of time talking about it because to me that is a foundational perspective that if you get this idea of before the harvest there's got to be a season of gardening, and I think most of you are gardeners. If you get that, then you're going to be able to more effectively garden with the tools that I offer you, that I've been describing so far, and we'll get into more detail on. But there's a wrong understanding of how evangelism is done in the New Testament. Secondly, is Christians are scared. And I mentioned that earlier, and I'm completely sympathetic to that. I don't know if you realize it, but the Apostle Paul was scared too. You know, I think it's Acts chapter 16. He's in Corinth, and Jesus appears to him in the middle of the night in a vision, and he says, Paul, don't be afraid any longer. Even the Apostle Paul was spooked. Circumstances were hard for him. And Jesus said, I have many people in this city. Just go out and speak on boldly. In Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus sent out the disciples in their first short-term missionary journey or whatever, he told them 3 times, do not fear, inside of 7 sentences. Matthew 10. Why? Because there's reason to be nervous about the culture they were facing. And then he went on to tell them, and you're going to be persecuted, and it's going to be hard for you, and some are going to kill you, but don't fear. Do not fear. Do not fear. Now, there are 3 different ways he characterized that, and you can check it out for yourself in Matthew chapter 10. But I'm telling you this because I know there's a lot of anxiety about going out and engaging people. We're not shedding blood, not in this country, for our convictions, but it's costing us more and more than it ever had before to be faithful to Christ, not just in the general gospel, but in the ethical things that the Bible teaches, and to be faithful to those things as well. It's costing us more and more. So I'm sympathetic to the fear issue. But let me ask you a question. How many people here like taking tests? Okay, a few, like probably a dozen. And I know why you like taking tests. And it's related to my next question. How many people like taking tests when you know the answers? Well, look at all the hands go up, see? And those people who raised their hands just a few moments ago, they know the answers. That's why they're glad to take the test. And that's the way I was as a student. I studied hard. I'll take the test. Okay, there's the deal. When we know the answers, when we have a goal in mind, when we have a perspective, when we have a plan in place, and we understand how to deal with the challenges, it changes everything. And that's what I want to talk about now, the game plan, okay? And the game plan I mentioned, uses questions as its foundation. I said there are 3 steps to the game plan, okay? The first 2 are really easy. The first step of the game plan, and before you write anything down, let me explain what I'm after here. I do not want you thinking when you find yourself in a circumstance where a spiritual issue comes up, or you're having a conversation with somebody, or somebody's challenging you, or maybe you just want to enter into a spiritual conversation. You want to initiate it, okay? I don't want you to be thinking about leading that person to Christ. That's way down the road, probably. I don't want you to be thinking about how you're going to deal with all these issues. I just want you to think about one thing and one thing only. It's the first step of the game plan, and that is gathering information. So write that down. We're going to gather information. We're going to find out more from that person about their view, okay? And the model question in this circumstance is very simple. It's, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Now remember, this is a model question, so there's lots of different ways to use it. Somebody says, you shouldn't be pushing your morality on me. And so my question is going to be, how am I pushing my morality on you right now? Now that's just a clarification question. What do you mean I'm pushing my morality on you? I want them to tell me, okay? If they say you're intolerant, okay, I'm going to say, why are you calling me intolerant? In fact, the number one thing when anybody calls you a name, they say you're intolerant, you're narrow-minded, you're arrogant, you're bigoted. Now, these are terms that people use of Christians all the time, and I don't think in most cases they're true, okay? They're just an attempt to shut you up. But instead of pushing back and saying, well, I'm not arrogant, I'm not this, I'm not that, the other thing, you want to ask a clarification question. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by arrogant? Why would you say that I'm arrogant in this circumstance? Why would you say that I'm intolerant? Now, we're going to come back to the intolerance charge in a little bit. I'm going to play that out a little bit and show you how I respond with a couple of other questions. The thing I want you to get right now is you want to get more information from them about their circumstance, their challenge, their ideas, whatever. I'm an atheist. Okay, what kind of atheist are you? What kind of God don't you believe in? Okay, some people don't believe in an old man in a chair with a gray beard up in the sky somewhere. I don't believe in that kind of God either. That's not God anyway. That's Father Time. The sickle is right behind the throne, right? Maybe they believe in some kind of force. They're spiritual but not religious. They don't believe in organized religion. I don't know until I ask them. I want them to talk about their views. Now, why would I want them to talk more about their views when I think their views are false? That's precisely why I want them to talk about it, because I think they're false. And if they are false, the more I get them to talk about it, the bigger the hole is they're probably digging for themselves. Now, I know what to look for a little bit because I've been doing this for a while, and you'll know more, even with the instruction from tonight, what to look for when you're listening for things. Like, for example, the guy who says, and this happened to be at a Ligonier conference a number of years ago, he came up to me and saw the pro-life material that we had at our table. It was cassettes. So you know it was a long time ago. And these guys are saying, what's a cassette? They were also stumped with the film part too, okay? And he says, well, I think abortion is wrong, but I don't think we should tell other people they can't get abortions. It's wrong for me personally, but I shouldn't be forcing my view on other people. Okay, now this is called the modified pro-choice position. I wanted more clarification from him, and if somebody asks you or raises that issue or says it that way, a lot of politicians say this, you have to ask a question, and it's a clarification question. It's our first Columbo question, essentially. What do you mean by that? But specifically in this case, I asked him, why do you think abortion is wrong for you? And he said, well, here's what he said. He said, I think abortion takes the life of an innocent baby. That's why I would never do it. And so I said, okay, let me see if I understand your view. And now all I'm going to do is feed back his view as he told it to me, but I'm going to take the spin off of it. I said, you actually believe that abortion kills an innocent human being, and you think other people should be allowed to do that to children. And he said, well, when you put it that way, I said, put it what way? That's your view. If it's not your view, then what did I misunderstand? But it was his view. And by the way, his wife and his adult daughter were standing behind him, and they're going, yes, 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 like this. But I want you to see there was nothing clever about my response except for I realized the flaw there, and all I asked was for clarification to help him get outside of the rhetoric and see what he's actually claiming, because that's the view. If you actually believe that abortion kills an innocent human being, why would you be okay with other people doing it? That's like saying, you know, I think slavery is wrong for me. Well, you're laughing because you see the point, right? But that's the way people get away with that all the time. So there's a case where I'm just asking for more information, but when I get more information, then I have enough to just point to his view, and he realized now he's going to live with that. Now, I don't know what he decided after that, but that was a stone in his shoe. And his wife and daughter are not going to let him forget it, right? It's the kind of thing that I hope would get at him for a while, and he'd realize, oh, that's kind of foolish. But notice how people are able to hide behind rhetorical characterizations of their view that turn out to be barbaric. I'm listening, and so I'm going to ask some questions to bring clarity to that particular view. So all I'm doing is that thing right at the beginning. What do you mean by that? Somebody says, well, everything's relative. Okay, that's meant to dismiss the Christian's claim to truth. Okay, it's all relative. So, and I wrote a book on relativism. It's called Relativism. Easy to remember. Feet firmly planted in midair. So I know what relativism is, but I don't know if that person does, the one who's making the claim against my view. So I'm going to ask him, what do you mean by relative? Everything's relative. What do you mean everything's relative? Now it's his turn to answer me, okay? And I'm going to tell you a secret about using this first question in conversations with other people. The secret is that when you ask them for clarification of their view, they're going to give you what I call, oh, wait a minute, I got to give you, this is a 60s alert here. Just a warning, okay? You know who Simon and Garfunkel is? Okay, well, that's good, a lot of them. Okay, even the younger people, good, they're great. They're my favorite artists. They're still alive, but they're very, very old. They wrote a song in 1966 called The Sounds of Silence. And that's what you get when you ask somebody, what do you mean by that? You get the sounds of silence. Because they don't know what they mean by that. They never thought about it. And this just underscores what I said earlier, that people are socialized to say certain things in certain circumstances, and they never thought about it. Again, Christians are guilty of that as well. And so when you ask for more clarification questions, tell me about it, they can't answer you because they don't know what to say. You get the sounds of silence, dead air. All right? So just let them work with it a little bit. I've had circumstances where people will come into conversations and it's like their sails are filled with their own ideas and their own ego and attitude and all this other stuff. And I ask a little question like some variation of, what do you mean by that? Help me out. Explain that a little bit more. I'm confused about this particular notion. And it's like the wind just goes completely out of their sails. They don't know what to do with that, all right? Now, I haven't refuted anything. I just want more clarification. And this is the kind of thing that I want you to get into the habit of doing. Somebody called me once on the radio show and they said, can you recommend a good book on Hinduism? No, it was Buddhism. And I said, why do you want to read a book on Buddhism? What do you mean by that, right? So I use this all the time, just to get clarification. He said, well, I have a friend who's a Buddhist, and I want to learn about Buddhism so I know how to talk to him. Well, don't buy a book on Buddhism. Just take your friend down to Starbucks and ask him. Tell me about your Buddhism. And you're going to get it right straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And you'll be in the process of building a relationship. Well, I don't know how to refute it. Well, you don't have to worry about that yet. Just learn about his view. Be a student of other people's views. If that's all you do, that's progress. You are learning how to garden, and you will be amazed how often just doing that is going to make a difference. in that person's life? Just the first question. I have another book here I'll be talking about more later. It's called Street Smarts, and it's basically the third step of the Columbo tactic, and I'll get to that in just a bit, on steroids, so to speak, okay? Using questions to answer Christianity's toughest challenges. That's why I pick simple titles. Street Smarts. It's the subtitles that are longer, they're harder. And I talk about a couple of circumstances in there. One situation where a woman uses tactics, the tactical method, for the very first time. She called me on the radio and gave the whole story. So I included it in the book to show you how effective just trying it out can be. I'll tell you about a conversation I had with a waitress in Seattle about 3 years ago. This is also in the book, the Street Smarts book. And something you need to know about me to appreciate this particular anecdote. It's not an illustration, this really happened. I am not a morning person. I was talking to the worship leader. I think that most worship leaders are morning people, because they start out like with John Philip Sousa, right when you're walking in, da, 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 praise the Lord. You know, I think, before my first cup of coffee, I'm an atheist. So I worked this event in Seattle on Friday night, and all day Saturday there were other speakers, but I worked really hard. I was tired on Sunday morning. I still had to preach 2 sermons at a local church. So I'm wheeling out my roller bag at dark 30 from the hotel into the little cafe next to it, and I want to get my coffee and maybe some scrambled eggs to get me going into the day. And I do not want to talk about God. I do not want to talk about Jesus. I don't want to talk. And the waitress comes up to me, and she's far too energetic for me for that time in the morning. So, what are you doing in Seattle this bright sunny morning? Go away. So I figured I'd get rid of her. I say, I'm going to preach in a church right after breakfast. I figured. She said, that's good. Good? Why would she think that's good? I said, are you a Christian? She says, no, I'm not a Christian. I used to be a Christian, but I'm not anymore. Now, the universe takes care of me. And I'm thinking, huh? So I asked her, what do you mean the universe takes care of you? Is the universe a person? No. Well, how can the universe take care of you? I'm just curious. I'm a bit mystified. Now, you know, this is a kind of New Age person, and it's kind of funny, these conversations, but she was genuine about her convictions. And I'm not putting her down at all, but I was confused by what she said. And I said, how could the universe take care of you? It's not a person. She thought about it for a second. She goes, yeah, okay. Well, I guess God takes care of me. I said, well, that makes sense. Then she said, and God is the universe. And I'm thinking, huh? So I asked her about that. And I keep asking her these questions, and I can't get a straight answer that would make sense to me. And finally she leaves. And I had a sense at that time that there was nothing that I said that had made a single dent in her thinking regarding the Christianity she'd left in favor of this New Age kind of approach to Christianity, or to religion, I should say. I got my eggs and coffee and everything. Now she brings the bill. And when she gives me the bill, here's what she said to me. She said, nobody has ever asked me questions about my beliefs before. And it got me thinking. That's like OMG, right? That would be gosh, Pastor. Just saying. Was I trying to witness? No, I was trying not to witness. But I couldn't help it because my inner Columbo kept coming out. Because I couldn't understand what she was talking about. So I was just asking clarification questions, and just me asking clarification questions without trying to witness, God used that to get her thinking about her views. So I always carry a copy of another book I wrote called The Story of Reality. They'll be giving one of those away probably tonight. And I have it in my bag all the time when I just to give away, and so I'm talking to somebody. I said, if I offered you a book, would you read it? She said, sure. And when I told her, I gave it to her, and I told her I wrote it, then she was really excited about it, and I had to sign it. And but I was pretty sure she'd probably read it now, you know. Again, that was it. I never saw her again. But notice that I wasn't even trying. I was trying not to, but God used that to get her attention. And you're going to find the same kind of thing if you just start stepping out and asking questions and drawing people out. In this particular case, what do you mean by that? The first question. Okay? And there's lots of other examples I give you of that, but let me just move on to the next step. First step is to gather information. You want to find out more about their view. Okay? Now you know what they believe, at least in that area. Next, you want to know why they believe it. I call this reversing the burden of proof. People make a claim that's against Christianity, then they expect the Christian to disprove their claim. That's backwards. If they say there is no God and we try to think of reasons why there must be a God and we want to offer them if we know them, then we have given them a free ride. No more free rides. That's the rule. We're going to let them defend their own views by asking a simple question. And here's the second question applied to the second step. Now, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what are your reasons for that? Or why do you think that's the case? People say, well, the Bible's been changed. Well, how has it been changed? What's your understanding of the change? Okay, that's the first Columbo question. Okay, now I get an idea of what you think happened in the transmission of the text over all the years. Why do you think that's actually what took place? That's the second question. Okay, now don't be surprised if when you ask the second question, you're going to get Simon and Garfunkel again. Sounds of silence. Because people have all kinds of convictions. If they understand the convictions, they still doesn't mean that they know why they think their convictions are sound. They haven't thought about it. So don't be surprised if you get dead air again when you ask that question. But that's something they need to be able to answer, right? Now notice when you ask these first two questions are the first two steps of the game plan. You are ankle deep in the shallow end of the pool. There is no risk to you whatsoever because you haven't made any claims against them. You're asking them to clarify their claim or to verify their claim. Oh, I never said it like that. Honey, would you write that down? Just it does, it's got a nice ring to it. To clarify or to verify. Don't want to lose that. You know, lightning rarely strikes twice, especially at my age. Okay, so that's what we're after right here, the first two steps. It's very, very simple. For example, I mentioned about the intolerance. Oh, actually, that's an example of the third step, so I'll hold off on that. I want to make an observation at this point. With these first two steps, you're going to gather information, get the lay of the land, get some intel, so you know what you're up against. I was sitting next to a guy on an airplane. He asked me what I was, look, if you fly a lot, you know everybody sits down next to you is weird, right? Until you say hi. You ask their name. And then they're human beings. They're not weirdos, right? Well, some of them are still kind of weird. But nevertheless, this fella, his name was John, and we're chatting a little bit. He asked me where I'm going. I mentioned I was doing an event. I talked a little bit about that. And then he says to me, well, I'm not a Christian. Now, by the way, is that good information for me to have? Yeah. Okay, that's good intel. Then he says, I used to be a Christian, but I'm not anymore. Oh, is that good intel? Yes. Then he says, actually, I used to be a preacher's kid. I said, John, how'd you used to be a preacher's kid? Did your dad die? He said, no, my dad didn't die. My dad's not a preacher anymore. Oh, okay. And actually, my dad's no longer a Christian either. Oh, is that good information to have? Can you imagine you think there's some baggage there sitting next to me? Oh, my goodness. Can you imagine if I would have just jumped into a little simple gospel presentation like some people who are more aggressive will do? And God bless them for that. I'm not putting that down, but I'm just saying, you see the problem here. He would have said, been there, done that, and it hurt, right? But instead, I drew him out, and I asked him more questions about his experience, and I listened and listened and listened. And finally, towards the end of his conversation, he said, people like you, Christians, right, normally would be really angry at me right now. but you're not angry at me, and I appreciate that. Well, why would I be angry at him? Why would I take offense because he had other Christians hurt him? He's a screwball Christian. Are there any screwball Christians out there? I don't mean out there. I mean out here. Of course. There are all kinds of goofy Christians. People say, man, there are a lot of hypocrites in the church. I said, man, there's a lot worse than that. That's why they're in the church. We need the help that the body of Christ is going to give us. I wasn't offended by what he had to say. Do you think that me just listening graciously to his experience and the bad news that he offered, do you think that by itself could have been a stone in his shoe? Absolutely. It turned out I ended up walking off the plane with his email in my pocket. How did that happen? Well, he started raising questions about the transmission of the text. The Bible's been changed over time. And I said, well, I actually wrote an article about that. Would you be interested in reading it? He said, yeah, I would be. I said, where should I send it? Gave me his email. I got to the hotel. I sent that article to him. He sent an email back the next morning and said, thanks. I never heard from him again. I said, wait a minute. You didn't get back with that guy? No, why? He's already had bad experiences with Christian. I just gave him an article, give him something to think about. And if he wants to get back with me, he's got my email, right? I'm not going to chase this guy around and be another bad experience. I'm going to let God work with that gardening that I did. Okay? But notice how by gathering that intel, it informed how I was going to deal with that unique individual so you know how to respond to each person. Okay? So those are the first two steps. Okay? And that's all you need. That's the game plan. That's all you need to get going, to fulfill my earlier promise to you, okay? What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? If this is all you do for the next 6 months, just getting used to it, no risk to you at all, I promise you, you'll be amazed at what God does just with that. And in the meantime, you're going to get a good education. I did a training like this for all day at the University of Minnesota. Actually, it was right off the campus at a church there. And in the afternoon, after a few hours of instruction, we sent the conferees out to engage those people the students on the campus. And when they came back, we got a little questionnaire and gave them an opportunity to talk to students. And when they got back, we had a little debrief, right? Tell about your experiences. And there was a mom there who said, when you told me that we were going to go out on campus to talk to the students, I feared that more than I feared childbirth. That's what she said. You moms know that's really scared. But I learned two things when I went out. First of all, people are not as scary as I thought. Wow, that's true. People are not as scary as you thought. It's easy to objectify them when they're way out there. It's once you start talking to them, you realize they're human beings. And they're just usually not as scary or frightening. Okay? Second thing, those people are not as smart as I thought either. That's what she said. No, she's not saying they were dumb, but don't we have this tendency, like the spies in the book of Numbers that go out to spy out the land, and 10 of them said, there are giants in the land, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. So they had an image problem, right? Now 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, right? But they didn't prevail. And that's sometimes the way we are. Because we objectify them, they're out there, we think all kinds of things that probably are not true about them. But when we start engaging, we think, that's it? That's what you believe? Now, we don't say it like that to them, but in our minds we're thinking, wow, I thought it would be better than that, you know? And so this is one thing you'll discover if you just start taking these first 2 steps, okay? Now, there's a third step, and it's advanced. The first 2 steps, you don't need to know anything about the first 2 steps, and you can start learning and being a student of other people's ideas, and you will get used to engaging in very friendly conversations, okay? Here's the third step. Step 3 is using questions to make a point. Using questions to make a point. Now, this is the place where you begin using your questions to actually advance your own view in a little bit more aggressive fashion. Maybe aggressive isn't the right word, a more deliberate fashion, okay? But we're still going to use questions. Now, this is the subject of Street Smarts. So Street Smarts is different than the tactics book in this regard. This is the third step of tactics on steroids. In the tactics book, I have the game plan and a whole bunch of other tactics that you can use in conversation. This takes the third step of the tactical game plan, using questions to make a point, to apply to a bunch of different issues, like atheism or abortion, or challenges to the Bible, or challenges to Jesus, or sex, or marriage, or gender, or those kinds of things. So what I do is I cover those issues using the tactical approach. Now, there's something you're going to need to note in order to employ the tactical game plan in the third way. It's not as easy as the first two. If you're going to use questions to make a point, you got to know the point you're going to make. And the particular point in the Street Smarts book is to show that a person's challenge against you as a Christian or their own opposing view is flawed in some way. Now, the only way you can show that it's flawed in some way is if you know how it's flawed. And that's what I do in the book. I go through lots of the substance of these challenges and show the way they're mistaken or they're flawed. And then I give dialogues in which you can use the questions to show the flaw. Okay? Now, there's the basic concept. Let me give you some illustrations because that's the easiest way to do it. Now, again, this is a little more advanced. Don't worry about it if you can't go there. You got to learn a few things before you can use it. But it's a tutorial on how to do that. That's the Street Smarts book. Okay? So I mentioned earlier somebody says, well, you're intolerant. Now, I realize that when somebody says you're intolerant, they have made a mistake. And you'll see what the mistake is in just a moment. But I mentioned that whenever anybody calls you a name of some sort, you always ask for a definition. And part of the reason I ask for a definition is I suspect in most cases, the person who's using the name against you, when they define the word, it's going to turn out that they are doing the very same thing against you that they're doing the very same thing themselves that they're saying that you shouldn't be doing. So when somebody says, you're intolerant, I ask them, what do you mean by that? First Columbo question. All right, now I know where I'm going with this. So this is third step. This is street smart stuff. The street is wherever you feel uncomfortable, right? You feel vulnerable. But if you know your stuff, you done a little work, you're not going to feel vulnerable like that. Somebody says, you're intolerant, I don't feel vulnerable. I ask them, what do you mean by that? Well, you think you're right. You're right and everybody else is wrong. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think when I give my point of view on anything that I think my view is right? This is not a trick question. Yes, I think my view is right. So do you think your view is right? So does he think his view is right? That's the point. If I didn't think my view was right, I wouldn't believe what I believe. I'd believe something else and think that was right. That's what it means to believe something. So given that fact, yeah, okay, I do think I'm right. Could be mistaken. I'm willing to say that to him. But let me ask you a question. So now this is my response to him. Now we're into Columbo number 3. The views that you have opposite of mine, do you think your views are right? What's he going to say? No, I think all my views are wrong. He's not going to say that. Of course he thinks his views are right. Now, remember, this is just a calm conversation. I'm not trying to do a gotcha, but I'm trying to get him to think about what he just said, which he's not doing. My questions are going to help him to do that. Do you think your views are right? Well, yeah, of course I think my views are right. Of course. My final question, why is it when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant, but when you think you're right, you're just right? That's a question, right? The ball is in his court. Now it's his turn to respond. Now, in a certain sense, that is a little bit of a mic drop moment. Like, now what is he going to do? But I want him to realize that all he's doing is name-calling. He's not dealing with the issue. We might be talking about gender or sex or abortion, whatever it is, and instead of dealing with the issue, he's changed the subject. And now he's attacking my character. So if he says, well, you're intolerant, what if I just said, well, you're ugly? Now, I wouldn't say that because even if it were true, because it's not polite and it doesn't matter. Let me ask you, can ugly people be right once in a while? Don't you hope so, right? And if a person's got any manner of vice, like intolerance or bigotry, that doesn't mean that his view is false. But people are very confused on that nowadays. So I want to get past the name calling and get right to the issue. You just changed this. Why'd you change the subject? What do you mean? Well, we were talking about same-sex marriage, and now you're attacking me, my character. Why did you change the subject? I was on a TV show once in Ontario, an hour-long nationwide TV show, when that exact thing happened. And I was being attacked, and we were talking about something else. I said, we just changed the subject. Why don't I just agree that I'm intolerant, narrow-minded, and bigoted? We just all agree I'm a bad guy, okay? We all agree at that. Now can we talk about this other issue? That was the point, all right? So that was the tactical maneuver in that circumstance. Now, it doesn't mean when you do that people are going to always get it. But it's the best you can do in a circumstance like that. And also, when I respond in that way, I'm the one in the driver's seat. He's calling me intolerant. Now he's being aggressive at me. He's in the driver's seat, right? When I start asking the questions because I know where I'm going, then I'm in the driver's seat trying to help him to see that what he's doing is not helpful at all. It is not useful, okay? This kind of thing happens a lot. I was in a chiropractor's office getting chirocracked. And we were having conversations, spiritual things, and the issue of sexuality came up, and he asked me some questions about that, and I gave my candid answers, friendly conversation, and he said, well, you Christians are nice people, then you start getting judgmental. That's what he said. Okay, now he just made a mistake. Some of you might see it, but a lot of you haven't seen it yet. You're going to see it very easily in just a moment, and then you'll never miss it again once you see it. And I said, his name was Gilbert. Gil, what's wrong with that? And he said, well, it's wrong to judge. Okay, now my question, clarification question, drew him out so he makes a statement. Now I can work better with that. I said, well, Gil, if it's wrong to judge, then why are you judging me right now? You see that? If it's wrong to judge, then why are you judging me right now? Now, he had never heard anything like that, and he stepped back a little bit. He's thinking to himself, like trying to figure out what happened. and he said, well, I guess I was judging us. Oh, well, I guess it's okay to judge. That's what he said. But he said, it's wrong to push your morality on other people. Once you push your morality on other people, then you've stepped out of line, right? Then you've gone too far. And so I had a clarification question, Columbo number 1. I said, Gil, is that your morality, what you've just said to me? Oh, yeah. And he said, God bless him. He just fell right into the hole again, Yeah, that's my view. I said, then why are you pushing your view on me right now, your morality on me right now? And so he's back in the corner scratching his chin. And finally he says, he made a couple of false starts. He can't get going. And the reason he can't get going, and this is in the tactics book, it's the suicide tactic. It's when your view commits hara-kiri, all right? It can't get off the ground. It's like, I cannot speak a word in English. You see, that's false, right? Do you see that's false? I realize it's late, but okay. So that's what happened. He's doing the very things he's telling me not to do. It commits self-destructs, basically. It's a self-refuting statement. So he's back there thinking about, he's making a couple of false starts. He can't get going. Then he says, well, it's not fair. I said, what do you mean it's not fair? He said, well, I can't find a way to say it in which it sounds right. I thought I was playing a word trick on him. I said, Gil, it's not a word trick. You're doing the thing you're telling me not to do. It's just simple self-refutation, And I've had this conversation with people, and sometimes they say, now you got me all confused. I said, no, you were confused when you started. You just now figured that out. Okay, so those are some examples. Here's another one. A gal came up to me early on at Stand to Reason, and she said, my She's an anthropology student. She was in a class at college, and she got her professor, when she said that she wanted to be an anthropology student so she could be a missionary in other cultures, her professor said, well, that's wrong for you to try to change other people's religious views, okay? Now, some of you maybe are picking up on this already. You're seeing something in that already, okay? So she came to me and said, how do I answer her? And I say, you ask her this question: Professor, are you trying to change my religious view right now? Because, of course, Christianity is a missionary religion, evangelistic religion. Well, that's precisely what the woman is trying to do while she's telling her student that you shouldn't be doing this kind of thing, all right? So there's another example. You've got to see the problem. But when you see the problem, you don't want to just point it out baldly, so to speak. You want to ask a question. You want to use a question to make that particular point. And then the ball goes back in their court. And this is shrewdness. Jesus said, be gentle but shrewd. This makes your understanding of the problem so much more poignant, so much more effective, so much more penetrating when you toss it back in their court. And then it's up to them to respond. And if they can't respond, well, that's okay. You don't have to answer me. Stone in the shoe. Stone. You just let it lie. Let God work on that person. Okay. So I was in a Q&A session. We'll be doing that shortly. And a gentleman in the session said, prove to me that God exists. That was his challenge. Okay. And I got the same challenge at the University of Toronto when I did a talk there. The student came up to the microphone, and he said, there's no evidence for God. It's basically the same thing. And I said, first of all, to the man who said, prove to me that God exists, I said, the problem with the way your question is worded is you're using the word prove, and I don't know what would count as proof for you. And if you don't clarify that, you will never get off the ground, because you can give all kinds of evidences, and pretty soon, and a person is just going to say, well, that's all well and good, but it's not proof, right? So you got to clarify that. So the guy said, well, can you just give me some good reason why God exists? I said, sure. Now, I happen to know that one of the best evidences for the existence of God is the beginning, the fact that the universe had a beginning. Let's just put it that way, okay? And so I'm going to employ that using my questions. So I asked the guy and the student, I said, do you mind if I ask you some questions? No, go ahead. I said, the first couple are pretty simple, and this is in the Street Smarts book, by the way, this whole illustration, because this is something you could use in conversation with people to get them thinking. I said, the first couples are simple, but just play along with me. Okay, do you think that things exist? Yes. Good. Me too. The things that exist, whatever they are, have they always existed? Now, this is a question about the eternality of the universe, but I'm putting it in very simple terms. Is the universe eternal? Did it come into existence at some time in the past? Nobody believes that the universe is eternal anymore. That was very popular early 20th century, not anymore. Big Bang cosmology has pretty much convinced a lot of people. I know Christians are sometimes, they don't like Big Bang cosmology. Don't worry about the language. What matters is that the Christian and the non-Christian both believe the same thing. There was when the universe was not, and it came into existence. That's all we're working with here, okay? This is called a cosmological argument because we're making an argument for God based on the existence, and in this case, the coming into existence of the cosmos. So he says, no, the universe is not eternal. It came into existence, Big Bang, whatever. Great, I'm with you on that. Okay, here's the third question, and this is the question that matters, I told the questioner. I said, what caused the universe to come into existence? Now, I'll make it easy for you. You only have two options, either something or nothing, or no thing, you could say that. Something or nothing. There are no other alternatives. That covers all the bases, right? Now, the challenger doesn't want to say something, because if something made the universe, that would be outside of the universe. That means materialism, that just the universe exists, is going to be false. And it's going to have to be something pretty powerful and pretty smart, and probably an agent of some sense, a person that initiates the cause, okay? Now, that sounds too much like God, so he doesn't want to go there. But what's the only other thing that's left? The only other thing that's left is the other option. Nothing caused everything for no reason and no purpose. And by the way, those all go together. If nothing caused everything, there is no reason and there is no purpose. That's the package. And that's what he's stuck with. Now, I'm not trying to prove God's existence with this line of questioning. What I'm trying to show is that God is the odds-on favorite. So what is most reasonable is what I'm asking. You just think about that, I say. What is the most reasonable? Well, the most reasonable is that something caused everything, right? If the universe came into existence, then there must have been a cause for that, not no cause. Because if you say no cause, that's worse than magic, right? Magic is when you have a magician pull a rabbit out of a head, but we don't have any magician in this situation. And we have no hat. We just have the rabbit, the universe, right? Now, I'm looking for the odds-on favorite here. Is it possible the universe came out of nothing? No cause? Maybe. I don't think so, but okay. My point is it the odds-on favorite? So, ladies, when you come home from wherever, you see a new Mercedes XL in the garage that wasn't there before, and you say, honey, where'd that new Mercedes XL come from in the garage? The husband says, darling, it just popped into existence out of nothing. That's the way the universe came to be, the scientists say, so I don't know why it happened to a little Mercedes. Would you believe him? No. Of course not, because it's not the odds-on favorite, and that's all I'm going for here, and then I just leave it. You think about that's the stone in the shoe. So what I've been trying to do, and it's almost time for our Q&A here. What I've been offering this evening is a different way of thinking about what we've characteristically called evangelism. I'm using a different word. I use the word ambassador because that's also a biblical word, and I like the way that sounds because it gives a characterization of the feeling of our approach. It's a genial diplomacy. We're not getting into fights. We're just asking questions and having people think about what we've offered them, okay? I'm suggesting a game plan that will allow you to do some gardening and don't worry about the harvest, because my conviction is the harvest will take care of itself, as the poll demonstrated here earlier, okay? The important thing is a goal in conversations. I've offered as a goal, just put a stone in their shoe. Give them something to think about. How do we do that? We got a game plan with 3 steps. The first step is to just gather basic information to get the lay of the land, to get a sense of how that person's life, is, or their beliefs happen to be, or clarification on their views. Just getting information. And when they raise different challenges and objections, you're going to probably ask a lot of clarification questions about the challenge. And you'll see a lot of that in the Street Smarts book. Once you get clear on their view, if they're able to clarify for you, then you want to know the reasons why they hold the view. You reverse the burden of proof, no more free rides. How did you come to that conclusion is our question, okay? When it's time for us to make our point against a view or against a challenge, we have to know what point we want to make, so it requires a little more insight, so the third step is going to be a little bit more advanced. And if you don't know how to go further, that's right, you don't have to go further. Maybe next time around you will. Maybe you can go further on some things but not others. That's true for all of us, even me, okay? We do what we can and trust God to use it. And if we don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. It's okay, no problem. But if we do know the answer, we want to make the point using a question. We want to make the point using questions to answer Christianity's toughest challenges. That's the subtitle for the Street Smarts book, okay? That's it. That's how we can make the most impact, I think, on others for the cause of Christ. A genial, interactive, conversational, curiosity-driven approach that hopefully will give them something to think about, because Jesus is worth thinking about. He's the best explanation for the way things are. Thank you. Thank you. Now, the boss man's coming up. He's setting up for Q&A, but I want to say something about the card that you were handed out when you came in. Many of you have this. If you don't, there should be some more by the book table. This is my first time in this church. For many of you, this is our first time together. I've met some people that are familiar with Stand to Reason, but I don't want this to be the last time that you're connected with STR. That's what this card is for, okay? If you notice there's a perforation in the middle of the card, do you have a card here? Let me just see it if you have it. Okay, so I want you to tear it at the perforation, okay? This large part is a thumbnail sketch of what I've just described for you, the Columbo tactic, okay? There's a lot more tactics in the book, but this is the game plan. You keep that. That's for you. This one's for me. Has a place where you can give your name, your address, and your email address. Why do we need that? Because we want to send you free training material every single month. That includes a bi-monthly, we call it a newsletter, but you don't get pictures of our staff at bake sales. That's not that kind of a newsletter. It's going to be an article that I write, and just so you know, virtually every book that I've written, every chapter has come from a solid ground newsletter that we've sent out for free to our tribe, our community, okay? But in order for us to send that out, we have to know where you live. On alternate months, you will get a one-page mentoring letter from me where it has a quick analysis of some particular issue, okay? So take a moment and fill that out, and when you're done, when we're finished here, take it to the table where the books are at. I'm going to give you your first bit of training material, okay? And there's a little red booklet you'll see there called Jesus the Only Way, 100 verses. I found 100 verses in the New Testament that explicitly or implicitly teach that Jesus is the only way of salvation. 9 lines of argument that we find in the New Testament. Now, I'm not going to give you this. That's $2. But I am going to give you a quick study sheet, laminated plastic, that has all 9 lines of argument in the major verses. This is not for sale. We will give it to you in exchange for your card, okay? And that'll be in the back there. So we will then send you, in a couple of weeks, we'll send you a welcome packet, welcome to our community, Stand to Reason, and then you'll get stuff on a regular basis from us that will help you to be a better ambassador for Christ. All right, boss.
All right. Amen. All right. Good stuff. So we got some questions here. And lots of thought-provoking stuff. I know that's probably going through people's minds. I wanted to say, Greg, I think I'm a hybrid. I think I'm a Heinz. I think I'm a harvester and a gardener. Is there a place for that?
Yeah. No.
No. Oh.
Find some other. No.
Okay.
People are all over them. People may find themselves in different circumstances. Yeah. A harvester may be in a gardener may be in a circumstance where they harvest, and a harvester may be in a circumstance where they garden. But these are kind of general categories to help you have a sense of where you fit best, and then therefore where you will operate most effectively.
I think in Kern County, and I've lived in a bunch of different counties in both California and out of state, but I think Kern County, we sometimes think of ourselves like the Bible Belt of California, and I think we're maybe a little more gardened than a lot of places, but I also think where we are is changing very quickly, and I think we're becoming more and more multicultural. We have like a huge Sikh population in Southwest Bakersfield, and more of these worldviews that people they're not getting it, right. And there are people that I will still talk to straightforward about the gospel. But I had a conversation not that long ago where I said, what do you understand it takes for a person to go to heaven? Well, person said, you need to believe in the pagan sun god. Okay. And so, so I go, okay, well, where are those Columbo questions?
Yeah,
so,
right.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, that's what I would ask. I would get clarification. And even to say about going to heaven, that presumes a certain kind of worldview. Mm-hmm. And not everybody shares that worldview. Right. 50 years ago, we did in America, largely, that was the question. But nowadays, it's very different. Although 65% of the people in this country self-identify as Christian. Yeah. But when you ask them specific questions, they are all over the map. Which brings me to another issue. And maybe if I could just offer a little thought here. We were talking a little bit beforehand, and you mentioned a little bit how apologetics or reasons why Christianity is true was a big help in your life. And, I run into a lot of Christians who just think that this is a waste of time. And so I just want to give you a couple of things to think about. First of all, it's actually commanded in Scripture to be able to give an account for the hope that's within us. This is 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 16. Always be ready to make a defense for the hope that we have, basically, okay? And so that's commanded. That's one good reason to be able to do that as best we can. And there are going to be people at different levels. But here's another good one. All of the people in the New Testament did this. Jesus did it. Peter did it. Paul did it. They all did it. John did it. They all gave reasons why. And I could just go through a litany, have a whole talk about this, but I just want you to think of two things regarding this particular point. One of them is Jesus. If you go to John chapter 5, Jesus is engaged with the Pharisees, and Jesus said, you don't believe me because I'm just speaking for myself. I'm just my own witness, so you're not going to believe me. Okay, then you ought to believe John the Baptist. He's the second witness. Or you ought to believe Moses. He's another witness. Or you ought to believe what the Scriptures say about me. Or you ought to believe in virtue of the miracles that I do. Wow. Even Jesus of Nazareth was willing to give reasons why people ought to take him seriously. All right? And it's interesting, and this is the second point I'll make on this, is that in John chapter 20, verse 30, just make a note of it. It's at the end of the gospel. John tells the reason why he wrote the entire gospel of John. He says, many other signs and wonders Jesus worked that were not written in this book, but these have been written. He concluded 7 miracles in the Gospel of John. Why? So that you would believe. Believe what? That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and in believing have a life in his name. In other words, John says the whole reason for the entire gospel was to give evidences so that your faith would be informed with good reason and you could trust in Jesus the Savior. It's right there, okay? First reason, it's commanded. Second, the apostles and Jesus did it. Third reason, it works. J. Warner Wallace was here last year. Jim, the best apologist I know, hands down, came to Christ through evidences. Here's the fourth reason. Understanding the evidences, the reasons why Christianity is true, will help you face the toughest critic you will ever face. Guess who that's going to be? You. Just like it was for you. The toughest critic you'll ever face is yourself, because everybody has doubts. Everybody has doubts, one time or another. You wake up in the middle of the night, you think, maybe I'm making a big mistake. That's happened to me. How do I put myself back to sleep? I think of the reasons why Christianity is true. And then I go to sleep.
All right. So we've got some questions here, and first question is a good one. How do you respond to someone who is not willing to listen without anger?
Well, it's interesting, if they're getting angry, you're probably touching a nerve. And sometimes it's appropriate. First of all, do not respond in kind. This is really important. Take a deep breath, and you don't get your dukes up, okay? You just relax. You're in charge of this conversation. You're using a tactical approach. You're using questions. If they just start getting angry, what question would I ask? Why are you angry? By the way, you all got it. That was good. That's a good sign, Pastor. They're coming along. Why are you angry? Is that a fair question? Now, you don't have to be accusatory, but I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to say, but I'm going to take that into consideration with maybe further questions. Why are you angry? Now, it might be that they had bad experience with religious people. If they had bad experience with Christians, I'm going to say, so have I. But I've had bad experiences with atheists too, with non-Christians. So how does a bad experience with now this is a question, right? How does a bad experience with a Christian make Christianity false? It doesn't, obviously, All it does is tell you about that Christian. It doesn't tell you about Christianity. Now, I understand, like, when Christians are nasty, that reflects badly on us. You know, I think, was it Jesus? No, Paul says this in Romans. He's quoting the Old Testament. It says, the Gentiles blaspheme my name because of you, the Jews, the way you behave. So there is a dynamic there we have to be aware of. But strictly speaking, because some individual Christian's nasty doesn't mean that Christianity is false, because Christianity is not about the Christian. Christianity is about the Christ. And that's what we want to move them towards. So that's the way I'd probably deal with that.
So here's one maybe from the other angle. Most of my colleagues seem to have no interest in spiritual things. How do you suggest we generate conversations? They simply do not care.
Well, I get this question a lot, and this is one of the hardest kind of people to deal with. And I'll just tell you my perspective on this. I'm looking for the person who's looking for me. I am not looking for the person who's not interested in what I have to say. God is the one who's in charge of that in their lives, and you can just take stock of your own life. Maybe there was a season in your life, a long season, where you weren't interested, and then something changed. That was true about me. And then something changed. Sometimes that change is initiated by some tragedy in your life. And that, my convictions are, it's largely engineered by God to get you to look up, right? When your own idols turn to dust, then what? And that's what it often takes. They call them foxhole Christians, but I think there's a legitimacy to that. In my case, it was a broken relationship. It didn't lead me to Christ, but at the end of a 5-year relationship, that was my sweet high school sweetheart, and that's how I made it out to California. I was chasing a woman, and truth be told. I didn't get the woman, but God got me. But that broken relationship made me look at my own philosophies about life and realize, you know, this gave me nothing really when the chips were down. All these various philosophies and ways of thinking, they work great when everything's going great. It's a whole different matter when things fall apart. Okay, and that's what it was for me, and it got me thinking now about other options. So keep your eyes open. If you have people that aren't interested and they're friends of yours or family members, just be patient. Try to live well before them in a holy manner, not a holier than thou manner, but in a virtuous manner, and be ready for when their world comes unglued. And then you can come to them. Be praying for them in the meantime. But then you come to them and say, you know, you need the Lord. You always did, but now you maybe have a better idea why that is. So, you know the saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. Some horses you can't even lead to water. And in my view, you just let them go for now. It's hard if you love these people and they're close to you, and this is where you're going to have to really pray and live virtuously before them, and that's the best you can do at the moment.
All right. So here's an interesting question. How can we convince people about the existence of an invisible, immaterial God when the yoga accounts offers more evidence of a universal energy?
Well, if somebody came to me with that comment, I'd have a lot of questions about the yoga accounts and the universal energy, because I don't even know what that means. And I'm not being condescending at all. I mean, I can imagine a meaning. It doesn't matter what meaning I imagine. It matters what meaning they have in mind when they make the statement. And I can pretty much guarantee that I'm not going to get a very lucid characterization of that. That's the appeal of it. This falls in the category of being religious but not, be spiritual but not religious, okay? And C.S. Lewis had a comment about that. He said you get all of the pleasures of being spiritual with none of the cost. Very high in personal freedom, low in individual responsibility, you know? And that's, I think, the appeal of it. And there was a stage in my life when I was like that as well. I'm not sure what this universal energy is, and somebody seems to think that there's a whole lot more evidence for that than there is for an invisible God. I'll tell you one thing. If there is a universal energy, it's invisible. So it runs into the same kind of liability. Notice how the comment about, and I'm not disparaging the question, I'm just making an observation. When you say invisible God, that kind of means we can't know it. But then what is offered as an alternative is an invisible energy that we apparently can know. You can know all kinds of invisible things. You do know all kinds of invisible things. Do you know what you're thinking right now? Of course you know what you're thinking right now. Can you see it? Can you feel it? I mean, with your touch? Can you smell it? Can you taste it? Can you hear it? No. You have faculties to behold realities in the universe that go beyond your five senses. You could close your eyes right now, and you can imagine your mother, I used to say like washing dishes, but that's so sexist now, nobody wants to hear it. So your mother changing the carburetor. You can close your eyes and imagine your mother doing that, and I could ask you, what color coveralls is she wearing? Blue. Okay, open your eyes. I say, did you see that? Yeah. Where was that? Where was that thing that you saw so clearly that you could describe the details of it? Where was that? It was not anywhere in the physical universe. It wasn't in your brain. You're not going to crack your head open and see your mom there changing a carburetor in blue coveralls. The fact is, we have these kinds of lucid experiences all the time, all day long. It's called our interior life. And I just gave a line of thinking to give evidence for the existence of an immaterial God who caused the entire universe as the best explanation for the way the universe is. That was an argument. What's the alternative? That nothing caused the universe. Well, that's silly. Pardon me for saying it, but that is kind of silly. All right? So that's an argument for God. That's totally tangible. I mean, tangible, not like you can touch it, but it's understandable, and I think it's very compelling, actually. It's a lot more compelling than appeal to a universal force. And incidentally, yoga and that whole way of looking at the world is a system. You can't just look at one little piece in the system and say, well, I have evidence for this piece, and therefore the entire system must be true. You have to look at the whole system. Okay? Now that system is an Eastern religion system. And in the Eastern religion, the purpose isn't to go to heaven. The purpose is to disappear. Nirvana means nothingness. Okay? If it's Buddhism, it's to escape the suffering that's in the world. So I was on the airplane with a guy once, and he said, all religions are about love. It was clear to me he'd never studied other religions. Christianity isn't about love, it's about forgiveness. It's about the kingdom of God, God's rulership, and our need of forgiveness to come under his kingship. Now, the love is involved, no question. Hinduism isn't about love, it's about the mirage of reality and getting back to the Godhead. Buddhism isn't about love, it's about escaping suffering. Islam isn't about love, it's about God's authority over you. It's about his rulership. So it's about submission. And so when you look at these other alternatives, you have to look at the entire thing as a worldview, as a picture of reality, and see if does this fit the world as I experience the world. And that's why I made the comment earlier that Christianity is the best explanation for the way things are. It fits the world better than anything else, and that's a good reason to believe it's actually true.
All right. For the sake of time, that's going to be it. Don't you appreciate Mr. Greg Kokel?
Thank you.